There are many speculations and assumptions about the genuine LifeVac airway clearance device being spread on social media sites and by individuals. Sadly, these false assumptions are also being spread by organizations that, instead of undertaking research, believe that their opinions have more authority even than the TGA. Here are some of the false things we have heard. The first myth is that all suction airway clearance devices are the same. This is incorrect. Anything available through bargain shopping sites is either a counterfeit or an untested, experimental, or an unapproved medical device being sold illegally. They use false claims and steal genuine stories from LifeVac to deceive consumers. There is only one genuine device that is non-invasive, proven and reviewed by the TGA, the LifeVac. The second is that any device that looks like the LifeVac is the same, just cheaper. This is also false. No genuine device is manufactured in China. The genuine LifeVac is only manufactured in the US and the UK under license under strict quality conditions, and each device is tested before dispatch. In Australia, we import the genuine devices from the US and then package to comply with the requirements of the TGA. Only the genuine device has been independently studied and reviewed and has saved lives. Counterfeits have been evaluated in the UK by their regulator, the MHRA, and found to be dangerous to public safety due to defective and poor manufacturing and design. Despite this danger, the TGA has been ineffective at stopping Australians from being exposed to the advertising and sale of these dangerous counterfeits. This is despite 3 years of complaints. The TGA has stated that it would take an Australian to die before they would even consider regulatory action. I think you would agree that this is both alarming and appalling. The next assumption is that the LifeVac needs to be approved or endorsed by the Australian Resuscitation Council to be used in Australia in first aid. This is also false, as the ARC has no legislated authority as a regulator or approver or endorser of first aid or medical devices, and no guidelines produced by the ARC are enforceable, legislated, or offer any legal protection. The sole regulator of medical devices in Australia is the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which has conducted a 2-year-long clinical review of the LifeVac, examining evidence, safety and risk, and concluded it can be sold without restriction, or the need for specific training and is low risk. Another assumption is that the LifeVac is not approved by the FDA in the US, then it isn't effective. Of course, this is an observation that holds no relevance, as low-risk devices are not typically classified by regulators anywhere as approved. That is a term reserved for higher-risk devices and pharmaceuticals. In Australia, low-risk medical devices, for example, are classified as listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, the ARTG, and there is no pathway to approval. This does not mean that it is unsafe or unreviewed. The next assumption being made is that LifeVac is designed to replace first aid. Again, this is a strawman argument designed to make the need for evidence higher than it needs to be. The LifeVac is specifically designed to be used after first aid fails, or is just not feasible. An example would be a person with a disability strapped to a high back chair. The next myth we hear is that first aid measures in Australia for choking are evidence-based and effective. In fact, they are divergent from the worldwide evidence, and particularly our version of chest thrusts has no clinical studies and no evidence of efficacy or rationale for its use. This has been established in international peer-reviewed literature. It therefore frequently fails. However, unlike medical devices where all failure and harm is reported to the regulators, first aid has no surveillance or reporting of failures and harm. Ineffective measures can therefore be used for many years, with users falsely thinking they are using best practice. We also hear the false argument that the LifeVac will cause harm or a delay in first aid. In actuality, the independent 10-year review of LifeVac usage on children showed no significant harm and no such delay in its use in emergencies. This too, turned out to be a false assumption. The next claim we hear is that the LifeVac has to be specifically included in the Work Health and Safety First Aid Code of Practice, or the ASQA units of competency, to be legally used in Australia. These statements are also false. SafeWork has confirmed this, and there is no legal requirement for the LifeVac to be part of a unit of competency, as the device is used after first aid fails and has been cleared by the TGA, the regulator under the Australian Department of Health, as requiring no specific training. The next myth we hear is that because organisations such as St. John or Royal Life Saving don't recommend the LifeVac, then we can't or shouldn't use it. Considering these organisations have no jurisdiction or authority outside their own organisations, it is curious how this belief has gained any credence. While each organisation is entitled to its own opinion on internal policy, that has no applicability to anyone else. Historically, these opinions are not based on evidence, clinical research, or law, but on historical rhetoric they are required to repeat. The next falsity we hear is from those who choose to limit their research to a Google AI search and believe three false assumptions. Firstly, that all research supporting the device is biased. This is a misunderstanding of academic literature, evidence review processes. All research has a potential for bias, and each study is assessed for potential. However, this does not mean that all studies are biased or the results or data are not to be trusted. If this was the accusation, then many journals would be successfully sued for defamation. Secondly, that more high-quality research is needed. Again, this is a straw man and is illogical, as no first aid measure currently recommended has strong evidence, and LifeVac is not seeking to replace these poorly evidenced recommendations. So what is the necessity for strong evidence above what is already available? Some suggest that without random control trials, RCT, on human subjects, the LifeVac cannot be considered effective. However, most would easily see the illogicality of this statement. No RCT has ever been conducted on recommended first aid measures for choking to prove efficacy and safety, as this is unethical and therefore can never be done. Unlike first aid, LifeVac has its effectiveness and safety constantly monitored by regulators under a risk management structure. Failure and harm would be easily provable from this data if it existed, without the need for an RCT. No one has been able to produce the overwhelming data to support this false, unsafe, and ineffective assertion. Thirdly, the false assumption that any opinions expressed in the results section of a study are supported by the data reviewed and contain no bias by the authors or publishers. A recent review of all published studies that included the LifeVac in the past 5 years demonstrated 88% support for LifeVac from the data, but only 55% support in the study conclusions and favored unevidenced assumptions. The LifeVac has saved over 4,400 lives, including over 2,400 children, all without harm or failure and all after first aid has failed. These are all documented reports, not customer reviews. There are many organisations and individuals using LifeVac around Australia, and the saves are real and frequent. They are in schools, daycare centres, aged care facilities, with disability providers, businesses, first responders, and many parents. We hope this video clears up some of the nonsense out there that you may have read in the press, read on a blog written by a self-appointed expert, been told in a first aid course, or read in an opinion online.